Services Committee meeting. One item on the agenda. I'd just like to welcome Councillor Tate as an observer. First time, I think. Yep. Okay, Carla.
Chairman, I can confirm that the meeting is quorate. There are a number of members who were not present at the start of the meeting. Sorry, I'll defer to Councillor Syme.
Councillor Syme.
Aye, thanks, Chair. Really disappointed. We've got 2 members short here because there was a licensing panel this morning, and it's still going on. And when I looked this morning, I had my doubts whether that would be finished in time for this meeting. So really disappointed that we're 2 members down because of the time in meetings and panels.
It's noted, John, but I think we're in the same boat. Sorry, not we. Administration's in the same boat. They've got members at that as well, or other meetings. So we are where we are. Just move forward. Any declarations of interest, Carol?
Sorry, it's for members to declare an interest.
Any declaration of interest? No. Okay, on the agenda, item 3, you have a paper and an appendix from the Director of Social Work about the budget control measures. As always, we'll go first-time speakers first, and we will confine to this one item of business. Okay? Director, have you anything like to add to this report?
Nothing to add, Chair, but happy to respond to any questions from members.
Okay, I'll open the floor. Councillor Martin first.
Slightly in the 4.1, there's a list of options, a list of things that we're going to be taking to try and get this the overspend under control. But there's not really a great lot of detail in it. A review of personalisation criteria to ensure the costs are appropriately managed are contained within agreed budget. That doesn't give us any information what has got to happen there, and it follows right down with most of them. We've not really got the information that we called for to make for this extra meeting at the last Social Services Work Committee meeting. Now, when we come to 4.6, the scale of the challenge facing the social work service is substantial, etc., and it is anticipated that additional resources will be required from out with our council in order to deliver the planned outcomes, including specialist external expertise, in other words, consultants. See, the money, the amount of time, so what we're saying in here is that the social services department doesn't have the expertise to bring these overspends under control.
John?
Chairs, so far as the issue of level of detail, paragraph 4.1, I'd refer members to the appendix to the report, which sets out 18 areas of activity and 52 associated planned outcomes. I think that gives a fairly useful kind of indication of the levels of activity that we are engaging in as a service, and I'm more than happy to engage with members around that detail. So far as the additional resources is concerned, I think it's always been recognised that within the social work service we did not have under our own control all of the resource that we would require to address all of the challenges facing the service. That includes the need for us to draw on the resources of the wider corporate council, and it may also be that some additional resource would be required from out with the council in the short term in order to help us to address some of the challenges. But I would point out to members that, as I've indicated at paragraph 4.6, the resourcing of the activities will be included in progress reports to members, so that members are fully cited on all of that.
John, do you want to come back on that?
Getting there, like, as I say, I know we've got the list of financial recovery activity, but to me it's still very short. Some of it's just stating the obvious, and it actually is quite short on information. That's just my opinion.
Okay, that's noted. Councillor Dick.
Thanks, Chair. Would it be correct in my understanding of 4.6 that that excuse me, will include the as we go forward with integration in the third sector and NHS?
Director.
Insofar as the integration agenda with health was included, yes, indeed, we would involve external parties, including the NHS.
Okay. Questions? Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for being slightly late. To be honest, I don't know, I caught the tail end of John's remarks where it's been scant in detail. I don't know if he used the word scant, but it's been lacking in detail. Quite frankly, I think it's just a furtherance of the report we got before when we asked for the special meeting, and indeed some of us were of the opinion that perhaps we should have had a subcommittee to look at this. Because what it gives is, again, more fine words with very little, if any, detail at all in terms of the anticipated spend, or at least savings, that's intended alongside the overspend. And in line with that, it doesn't say how the services are going to be affected, if indeed they will be affected. Because again, it's a lot more fine words, and it doesn't fill me with much confidence in terms of the department in being able to deliver. I wanted to see in this report how and when the savings were going to be met, what the total amount of those savings would have equated to, and the effect that would have on the service. Unless someone can point me to that, the information that I am seeking, then I see this as not being detailed in the way that, as a committee, I would have liked to have seen, and to allow us to scrutinise the savings against the service delivery. I'll turn you one, for instance, on page 9 of 14, just as an example. Develop a review process to ensure appropriate levels of social care packages and identify efficiencies where appropriate. And it goes on to say, reduce spending commitments as far as possible, commensurate with the responsible risk management. What does that mean in real effect? What on the service delivery?
Just a second, yeah.
Well, perhaps if I could just respond to that specific point, Chair. What we are doing as a service is looking at a range of existing care packages which involve a very significant level of expenditure on a week-to-week basis, with a view to seeing how far those costs can be reduced without placing the service user at risk. So far as the general question about there's not enough information, there's not enough detail, what I was asked to do at the last committee was to bring back a paper to allow members to discuss budget control measures. I would repeat the point I made earlier. There are 18 activities set out and 52 planned outcomes. There's quite a significant level of material there for discussion. As to the level of success in quantifiable financial terms, I've already indicated in the report before members on page 3 of 4, paragraph 3.5, the position has already shifted within 1 month to a £30,000 reduction in the projected overspend. We would anticipate that the impact of all of the measures taken together will allow us to bring the budget back into alignment by the end of the financial year, but members need to recognise it's still very early in that process. The information in relation to the projected overspend as at the 31st of October will, as I've said at paragraph 3.5, be referred to in the Corporate Budget Monitoring Report, which will be considered by a Policy and Resources Committee on the 4th of December. And there's a form of words in that report which indicates that there's confidence that the measures which have been taken by the senior management team will deliver a balanced budget, so much so that there's no provision made within corporate resources to find any extra money for the social work budget. So we will be reporting on a committee-by-committee basis on the performance against the revenue outturn, and that will include reference back to the points that are covered in this report. But I would stress that we first looked at this on the 25th of October, and this is now barely a month later. We're already showing some improvement in terms of the projected outturn, and I anticipate that that improvement will continue, and members will be kept fully appraised of that from committee to committee, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Brodie, and then Councillor Dick.
Thanks, Chair. It's good to see that we are making some progress, but I think most members would like more detail. At the last meeting we had, it was said that there was more detail available in the papers discussed by the Risk Enablement and Management Group. Is there any reason why we can't have a copy of these to see a more detailed explanation of what you're doing?
Director.
The Risk Enablement and Management Group is an officer group which is dealing with a number of tactical and operational matters. There's a substantial level of detail involved in the papers that go to that group, which are essentially working documents for officers. And what we are doing is trying to kind of, if you like, extract from that some of the high-level information, the strategic direction of travel for the benefit of members. And after all, this committee's remit, Chair, is to take a strategic overview and strategic scrutiny of the work that's been done by officers rather than to do the work of the officers. So there's always a balance to be struck between the level of detail which officers hold and the level of detail which is reported to members. But as successive progress reports are made to committee, as I've indicated at the third recommendation, which we're asking members to approve, in discussion at committee, I'm more than happy to give further detail against any of these broad headings. And there are, as I say, there are 18 activities there, and there are 52 planned outcomes. If members want to investigate and drill down below those, I'm here to answer those questions, and I've got colleagues here who can help with that.
Okay, thanks. Dick, you want to come back on this?
Yeah, just quickly, as the Director says, there's always a balance to be struck between our strategic role and the operational workings of the department. I think the balance, personally, I would like to see a bit more flesh in the bones to flesh out that, to give more examples of what's going on, without going into the nitty-gritty.
Okay, Councillor Dick, then Councillor Maitland, then Councillor Scobie.
Thanks, Chair. I noticed a reference to invoice processing. Are we looking aggressively enough at procurement and purchasing within social services? Given that I think there's only 20% of our procurement's done through the PCOS system throughout the Corporate Council, that's one area where considerable savings should and could be made.
Part and parcel of the work that we are doing is looking at how we can further improve the efficiency of the commissioning and procurement of social care services. And as part of that work stream, we will be linking closely with our procurement colleagues at the Corporate Council to see how far we can achieve further efficiencies.
Thank you. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Chairman. The paragraph 4.3, which is the appendix, and it is discussing the impact of the control measures, will be reported to us. I would like to know how that really will be measured. How will that be quantified? I think I'd be interested in knowing that. And if you'd allow me to come back with a couple of questions after that one's been answered, that would be kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Specifically in 4.3, the reference to impact is the impact of the control measures on the projected revenue outturn. So it's about the quantifiable impact in terms of reducing the projected overspend, specifically in relation to, because essentially what members have been concerned about has been the budget control arrangements in the service and how far we are or are not bringing the budget back under control. So the impact, the reference to impact at paragraph 4.3 is specifically on the financial outturn for the service by year end.
First time speaker was Councillor Wood and then Councillor Scobie again.
Thank you, Chair. Really, with regard to going through the financial recovery activity, there's a lot of people voicing concerns about lack of information, and I wonder if it's maybe partly lack of information and partly lack of understanding, and maybe it would be helpful if we were to go through this item by item through maybe a seminar process. Now, if the committee doesn't want to do that, I certainly would like to sit down with the director to go through it, because, for example, if you look at the prioritisation of cost reduction options and quantification of budget pressures, on the last item there, intervention on areas of slower progress is effective. Now, what kind of intervention are we talking about? You know, and I'd like to get an understanding of that. And the same when we look at the review, high cost packages, all adult service care groups, where it talks about systemic review of high cost care packages. Trying to get an understanding of what are we talking about within that? You know, what kind of care packages is it that it's trying to address? And then if you also look within the agreed budget spend transfer to and from integrated children's services, it's once again clarity of the impact of savings in one area of children's service to other areas of social work budgets. I need to get an understanding of that. I don't have that, and this paper doesn't give me it. So whatever way you want to take it forward, I would find it extremely helpful if we could, in actual fact, go through it in a more detailed way. Maybe I'm just not able to absorb the document. I don't know.
I think your point's well made, Andrew, and it's one of the main purposes of this meeting, the extra meeting today, was just to go down that route. Director, is there anything you'd like to add, Councillor Woods, at this moment?
I'm in your hands, Chair. I mean, I'm happy to pick up on the points that Councillor Wood has raised one by one, although I believe Councillor Wood was kind of suggesting, or hinting at least in his intervention, that perhaps a separate session of some kind might be required to have a more detailed and discursive look at the whole range of measures. So I'm entirely in hands of members how that is taken forward, Chair.
But I think in actual fact the purpose of this meeting was to drill down these exact questions, and whilst I think a seminar for all the committee members in the future about the workings of the entire department, not just the finances, would actually be a very good thing, and even if that was a series of seminars, I think I'd be extremely supportive of that. So I actually think we need to bottom out today, get as many answers as we can, and the ones we can't answer, which might be just maybe a wee bit too specific, then come back to members with those answers. So do you want to deal with Andrew's questions first, and then we'll go into Willie Scobie? Yep, okay.
Thank you, Chair. The first point, if I recall, was in relation to page 7, 14, the activity was prioritisation of cost reduction options, quantification of budget pressures, and specifically the fourth bullet point. Simply arguing, I think, that where progress in reducing costs, where there were projected overspends within the budget, was not delivering closer to an alignment with budget, the role of officers, the senior officers led by myself, would be to take additional measures to make sure that that level of reduction was achieved, but done in a way which was safe and which didn't leave vulnerable service users at risk. That's essentially what that bullet point relates to, that we are taking a proactive, interventive stance as senior managers towards delivering cost reductions.
Your mic, Andrew. You put your mic on because it's been recorded, remember?
Right, it's all this modern technology, you know. We're on page 8. It was the systemic review of high-cost care packages. It was trying to understand what we're talking about. Systemic review. What kind of systematic review I would talk about? What is the system, basically?
Well, I don't want to get into semantics. I'm not talking about a systemic review. I'm talking about a systematic review. So what we're saying there is that we know that there are, let's say, around 100 individuals within Dumfries and Galloway where the weekly cost of the care package is into 4 figures. Yeah, so that's quite a significant financial commitment for the council over time. What we want to do is to look at all of them. So that's what the systematic bit means. It means systematic. Look at all of those high cost packages and identify where, if we can, without leaving the individuals concerned at levels of risk which would not be acceptable, we can make savings to reduce the weekly cost of those packages. So it's about looking at all of those and coming back with clear recommendations as to where we can make some savings. And that has, I think, 2 benefits. One is a short-term benefit, so it will help us, Chair, with the immediate challenge of bringing the budget back into alignment during this financial year. But it will also, I think, give some indication to us of where we might look in the medium to long term to reducing costs in the future, where similar kind of needs arise. We can learn some lessons that help us to proactively manage the budget more effectively going forward. So that's really what we meant by systematic. Just means we're going to do them all and make sure that we've got the answers for them all.
Your indulgence, that's the very point I'm trying to get at, though, is how do you prioritise? How are you going to, in actual fact, identify which ones you're going to work with first? Because you're not, at least I don't envisage, you're suddenly just going to open up and work with them all at one go. You must have some scoring mechanisms, some prioritisation way.
Chair, Councillor Wood's absolutely right. I mean, we're not looking at every single care package. It's simply those where the weekly cost to the council is into 4 figures, and that's in early 3-figure numbers. So we're talking about 100, 120. Don't quote the exact figure, but it's a relatively manageable number from within the thousands of people that we support on a day-to-day basis. So that's where we are prioritising our attention at the present time. And we can perhaps widen that later, but in the first instance, it's to look at those. And we've got reasonable confidence that by doing that, we can deliver sustainable and safe reductions in cost without risk to the individual service users.
Sorry, you still... Andrew, we need the mic on.
Sorry. Clarity, re-impact of savings in one area of children's service to other areas of social work budget.
What that one refers to very simply is that in looking at the integrated children's services budget, which is something which both education and social work have an interest in, we don't wish to deliver a saving in one area of that budget at the expense of causing a financial pressure in another area of the budget. So we're not going to do anything that simply transfers the problem from left to right or right to left. That's simply all that means, and we need to be careful and cautious about that, clearly, Chair.
Okay, I'm just conscious Councillor Scobie's been waiting for some time, and then Councillor Martin after that. Sorry? Okay, we're back to you now anyway. I think, yep.
Thanks for letting me back in, Chair, from the previous remarks I made. Chair, you know, the previous speaker, Andrew, spoke about, you know, that he wants an understanding and suggested a seminar or whatever. I think that we should be able to understand the document as it is, with the proper detail and information contained therein. But a number of speakers have spoken so far and have not been satisfied, as I have heard, with the level of detail that is here. Indeed, we've had the director coming back and saying that, you know, issues that have been asked questions on are officer aligned more to members, and they didn't want members to do the work of officers. I would agree with them on that one. But however, I've got to be able to satisfy myself that I can scrutinise the information that's coming forward in terms of the saving, because it does talk in 3.5 of a £507,000 overspend on 2012-13. We have heard from the Director that on an outturn of October to date, there has been an anticipated 30,000 savings, but there's no indication of where that savings was found in the current report that we're sitting looking at just now, because that's an anticipated spend, and he then referred to it being early in the process. Well, I would suggest to the Director that we're well into the process, and indeed there would maybe only 5 months left of 2012-13 to try and recover the £507,000 overspend that is anticipated. And I think you said at the last Social Work Committee meeting, Director, that social workers were not accountants. Well, I've not asked for social workers to be accountants or have degrees in accountancy. What I'm asking for is the detail. And I think that the Director finished in response to Councillor Wood that he's reasonably confident that he can bring this back into line, if I heard him correctly, with no risk to service users. That's the very question I asked, and I referred to one example, and I'll give you another one this time. And it's review staffing cost pressures to identify short-term and medium-term approaches to reduce and minimise costs. Then it goes on to say, reduce spend on staffing during 2012-13 so far as is commensurate with responsible risk management to avoid any additional budget pressure during 2012-13. What does that mean? Are we talking here about cutting in staff?
Excuse me, you've asked the question.
I'm alluding to it, Chair, because I think in a previous life, if not the same life, then you have the restriction.
I've asked the question, I'll get the Director to answer.
I thought part of the question was as I was finishing, Chair. Would you allow me to finish?
As long as it's not a statement, you've asked the question. If it's the,
I'm asking the question in terms of redundancy, compulsory redundancy. What does this mean? And it's not just a question, that's the example. I have no confidence in the document that's presented that gives me any indication we're coming towards, and we're all going to dance about this as you're allowing without the information being here before us.
I can absolutely assure you we're not dancing about any issue. And the whole purpose of this meeting was to scrutinise and to ask questions. Right, that's exactly right, Councillor. We ask questions, we don't make statements. Right, you've asked the question and asked the Director to answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On that specific point about the, on page 10 of 14 in relation to staffing cost pressures, the last of the activities that's listed on that page, the reduced spend on staffing relates to whether we can hold some posts which are currently vacant for a little bit longer without immediately filling those posts in order to reduce the costs in this financial year, so long as we can do that without placing service users at risk. So as part of the work that we're doing in the Risk Enablement Management Group, we review the totality of the vacancies within the service, and we reach decisions as to which need to be filled immediately because of the need to protect service users, and which posts we can afford perhaps to allow not to be filled immediately. There's no question of redundancies, neither in the sense of a voluntary redundancy process, nor indeed a compulsory redundancy process. I can be absolutely happy to give a clear assurance to members on that point, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. It's just what the Director was saying, the review of the high cost packages, systematic review of the high cost care packages, and assured value for money of high care cost packages. What would be the position? Are we looking at if these costs are far greater than the likes of in-care, care home type thing, we will be having discussions with the relations, etc., not just the risk management. Everybody will be looking at this care package to, as I say, people won't be forced into a care home because their costs are far greater than the high cost package.
John?
There's no question of individuals being forced in one direction or another. I mean, the whole process of review is a collaborative one, which involves the individual who is receiving the support and the care, and in many cases, or in fact in most cases, their family. and it's a negotiated process. And what we are really talking about here is straightforward, clear efficiencies where we can reduce costs without risk to that individual, without detriment to that individual. So it's not a question of forcing people to do things that would be unacceptable to them. That's not the process that we're describing here.
Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that you allowed Councillor Wood to come back on his questions, then you passed me by. However, I'm grateful you've let me in again. In terms of the response I received, that would have been helpful if that was in the document, in terms of the number of posts that are currently vacant and the cost associated with that, the savings associated with that. That's the very the information that is required in detail, and I would ask for that to be presented under that one, so that I do know what is being talked of and that I can then scrutinise that. Can I turn you to another example now, Chair? Ensure existing commissioning and contracted services provide best value. And it's to the point being made by John Martin, where only this week I have spoken to two senior officials of the social work department with regards to commissioning and the delivery of respite and the services that are provided to the carers of those requiring the respite. And it was suggested by one of the carers that they were told that indeed there would be a cutback on this year, and that on next year they could not plan the way that they have. Does this mean that we're going to affect the arrangements that exist? Because again, there is no detail as to the real effect it is having on carers and those who require the respite. And that's the detail we need on the risk assessment and the service delivery alongside any commensurate savings that could be derived from this part. Where is the detail?
The question is? That's another statement, Willie.
My question is, what effect is this having on carers in terms of the service we are delivering, where they're being told that there could be a cutback in service delivery?
Thank you.
Chair, the phrase is used in a number of places throughout the document, that the actions that were taken will be taken so far as they are commensurate with avoiding inappropriate levels of risk or reasonable management of risk. And that applies to the example that Councillor Scobie has quoted as much as it does to any others. I have to say, Councillor Scobie has the advantage of me. I'm not in a position really to discuss the specifics that he's raised, and I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with him at his behest offline to see if we could resolve any of the issues, either real or perceived, that seem to be around for that. But certainly nothing that we are doing as part and parcel of seeking to bring the budget back into alignment will be done at the expense of leaving people at unreasonable levels of risk. And it's conceivable that the failure to provide adequate respite at particular points of crisis would fail that test. And we wouldn't, as conscientious social care professionals, allow individuals to get into that situation. And the other point I would make about the page 12 of 14, the point Councillor Scobie directed us to, the point on commissioned and contracted services, really just to reiterate the response I made earlier to Councillor Dick in response to his question, that we are looking to work as closely as we can with the Council's corporate procurement team to make sure that everything that we do is A, in line with EU procurement requirements on us, and B, as efficient and effective as it can be.
Thank you. Back in, Willie, and then Councillor Maitland after that. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy to give way to Councillor Maitland. It's another question.
No, I didn't want you casting it up to me, Willie.
Again, Chair, release funding from Local Change Fund to support the implementation of Social Work Business Plan 2012-15 in the present financial year. That goes into 3 years and goes beyond the £507,000 that we are trying to bring the budget back in the line. How much does this equate to? Because my understanding of the Change Fund is that it should be a new service and not for existing revenue funding. So how much is this and what is being spoken of in here in detail?
John?
That page 10 of 14, it's the second activity for the benefit of members. The local change fund is made up of essentially what was the resource transfer, the underspent resource transfer monies from NHS Dumfries and Galloway. And that money effectively ends at the end of the present financial year, which is why we've said here that it will help us with the implementation of the plan, but only in the present financial year. We have reported separately on the local change fund, and I'm happy to go back and check the detail of that. But members of committee did agree allocations of money for last year and for this year. And what we're looking at is the previous allocations agreed by this committee for the present financial year, whether there's any scope within that to redirect some of that funding to enable us to help to bring the budget in on balance by the 31st of March. I don't want to give a specific figure in case my memory is faulty, Chair, but I can check back on the detail of that and I'll make that available to members.
Is it direct?
Yeah, I'm coming back because I didn't ask for one from memory. Had that been contained in the report, a detail of that? Because even at the local change fund, that means you're taking away from how that could have been used to offset an overspend. So I have not asked for memory answers. I'm asking that, and indeed referred to it, that should have been detail in the report. And you know, there is a lack of detail in this report that I keep coming back to.
Okay, Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much. The issue of vacancies, I'm going back to the fact that I believe that members want to know what the impact will be, what the impact of these...
One meeting, please, yeah. Can you hear the question, Jane? Can you repeat it, please? Thank you.
Yes, I was really going to say that I believe that members will be interested in the impact of changes of service or anything that flows from the actions here upon people in their wards. And so I think, bearing in mind that you've got these groups based on localities, or in our areas, there would be no particular difficulty, would there, in asking for area committees to receive some level of information about the impact upon these activities upon people in their areas. I'm thinking particularly with respect to vacancies. You're telling us that there are vacancies. I think we would be interested in knowing, the vacancies which would occur in each of the localities and what the impact would be upon the services there. I'm also, quite separately from that, I would like some advice on that, whether that be possible. I would like to suggest it was possible, and in fact, actually, that we should make an effort to say that this should be dealt with strategically here, but the effects upon individual people and services should be reported locally. I think that would be useful. I think it would be helpful for the areas to know individually what is happening under their watch. The other thing to say, Chairman, is that there is in DG First an underspend on home care services of £304,000. And I am not totally clear where that sits with respect to this activity, and maybe I could have some assistance with how that squares with this action plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. On your first item, I think it's a very good idea to go back to area committees. My only worry is that the numbers may be so small that the individuals will be identified. That would be the only worry. We need to take governance advice on that to protect the integrity and the identity of service users. So it's not a case of saying no. I think we need to be very careful in how we do that. But in principle, I'm absolutely with you on that. Yep. I'll let John answer the second part of your question. Yep.
the issue relates to the reported spend in relation to home care, as reported by DG First. The members will recall from the activity-based budget analysis for the social work service, which was considered at committee recently, there was something around £7 million spent in-house on home care. Now, effectively, the way that funding is reported on, the way it's accounted for and reported on, is through the DG First Management Committee. So it's as if social work has effectively transferred a chunk of money to DG First, and it's DG First's job to use that money effectively and efficiently. And if they deliver an underspend on it, then it shows as a saving or an underspend in their part of the world, and it doesn't effectively show as an efficiency or a saving for social work. Now, that has historically been the case for as long as I've been here. For 5 years that I've been here as director, there's always been a level of funding spent on in-house home care, which shows under the accounts for, first of all, combined services and now DG First. It's not seen in accounting terms as social work money that's being spent over there, and so that, if you like, social work should take some benefit from any underspend, if you like, or any saving or any efficiency. That sits across in DG First. And in accounting terms, that's where it sits. None of the budget monitoring information which is presented to this committee reflects any of that £6 to £7 million spent. Now, whether that is correct or not, well, I think we could have a reasonable discussion and debate about that, but that just is the factual position at the moment. So that 300,000 odd underspend over there is a 300,000 odd underspend over there. It doesn't really directly relate to the spend within the social work service budget. Whether it should or not is an open question.
Jane, just we come back, I see Sean's up in the corner there. We have had occasions where money has been transferred back, am I right, Sean? You know, there were occasions in the past when DG First have transferred money back to social work budget that was effectively a saving in their commission service.
We are looking closely at the DG First element of underspend, and if we can clearly show an element that does relate to social work, then we will look to see about transporting it over. There is £48,000 of that underspend, which we do know relates to relates to social work, which comes across as part of the saving. You know, we should be doing that transfer in the next month or so, but that's just 48,000 of it. The rest of it sits with DG First, and in effect, any underspend there should go into the corporate pot at the end of the year, and in effect, you know, be used for, you know, to increase balances, offset future savings, etc.
Thanks, Sean. Jane, you want back in?
Well, I do, because I don't completely understand whether or not that money comes as a result of efficiencies made in DG First or under commissioning of in-house home care. And that's the issue I'm getting at here, because, you know, some of these planned outcomes are going to be dealing with value for money, you know, and showing what is value for money and what is not value for money. And we can't shy away from this particular investigation. We've got to look carefully at how is the best way of using our resources to achieve maximum for people out there, however it happens. And I don't think it's completely clear from these activities what the answer to that is.
Director?
I think I would very much agree with the point that Councillor Maitland makes, and I have argued in the past that we almost need to, in a sense, account for that spend in two places. Now, and that may be, it might be saying something that's unspeakable in terms of accounting practice, and Sean will tell me if that's the case, but it does seem to me that having some kind of clearer read across between the impact of an underspend in one part of the council's budget, i.e. in the DG First budget, and how that should or shouldn't impact on the social work spend, or what credit or otherwise there should be for that in the social work budget. I think that's been a gap, and And I've argued in the past that there should be some dual accounting in that matter, which would help us to clarify the point that you've raised.
Jane, okay, just a second, Andrew. Just before we move on, Jane, can you just clarify exactly what you meant that you would like to see going back to area committee for consideration?
It seems rather a long time ago. What I want is, I want to know if we're looking at these matters with respect to locality groups, and you are looking at budgetary control based on localities, we would be, I think, interested in knowing what the impact of any changes that are made or suggestions that are made in these groups on the people in our wards. I used as an example, one of the things here was vacancies. I'd be interested in knowing what level of vacancies there are across the region, but only in respect of what will be the impact on people in receipt of our services in our areas. And you know, the truth is that members, I think, are much more interested if they're told about what the effects are upon Stewartry or Annandale or Wigtonshire or Nithsdale, as opposed to thinking about the whole region, which is rather more difficult to get a handle on. Well, I mean, this lately has been to the area framework, which is a whole other can of worms, but, you know, let's use you've matched it up here. I absolutely agree with it. So let's use the information that comes through, which is relevant to the areas, to report to the members in the areas on the impact of any changes in service that are proposed as a result of this work. Is that right?
Yeah. Thanks, Jane, for clarifying that. And I think I'd be happy to insert a recommendation to that effect. We'll come to that later, if you're agreeable. Councillor Wood and then Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair. It was really just to pick up on that point on DG first. My understanding is that the underspend is due to contingency fund as such, which is used for the troughs and peaks of demand in care services, and that's extremely hard to determine from social work at times. That is my understanding of why you've got the underspend taking place within DG first.
As that's noted, Andrew, thank you. Councillor Scobie and then Councillor Dick.
Yeah, Chair, it's just for clarification from yourself, because you referred to, you know, when asked the question by Jane in terms of the response I got from the Director, that the reduced savings in staff was to the vacancies. So, you know, I have difficulty understanding how a vacancy can identify anyone. I would assume that was a vacant post. And the interesting point, as I picked up from Councillor Maitland, was to report back, that could be 2 social workers, for instance, in an area, and it's the impact and effect that would have on the service delivery if those were, as the Director has come back with. Had it been in the paper, it would have been more helpful, but that's the kind of information we need. Is it 2 social workers? Is it 2 clerical assistants? Is it 1 manager? I don't know, because it's not here in detail.
Willie, that's exactly why I asked for the clarification, because I had understood part of the question was to refer to the social, to the people who are receiving the services as opposed to the people delivering the services. That's why I sought clarification. Okay? Councillor Dick?
Yeah, it was just on the point that Councillor Maitland raised there. That seems to be a ludicrous situation, and I think it's a debate that's going that has raised itself quite a number of times. The idea that we pay a lump sum of money from social work to DG first for presumably a slightly unknown quantity of commissioned home care services, and then they keep the money. Utterly ludicrous situation, and I think it's something that the council needs to address urgently.
Yeah, that's noted. I don't think there's anything to say to that one. Questions? In that case, then, I'll move on to the recommendations. Oh, sorry, Mr. Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, you say you're moving on to the recommendation. I would move that there is insufficient financial detail in the level of savings that could be accrued from the recovery plan within this report against the risk assessment to the service users required to properly scrutinise the recovery activity, and therefore ask for a further report with the detail, the financial details as to the £500,000 recovery to bring the budget back into line, and that we note everything as it stands just now.
Karen?
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just give some advice, and it's just, I suspect the 25th of October is very much in the living memory of members. You did have quite a range of decisions at that committee, one of which was to ask for further information on the costs. The very information now you're saying is absent from this report. What you do have, and you did have on the 25th of October, is one decision which is accurately reflected. I have checked back on your minute, which is to say that you were looking for a special meeting being convened to discuss the control measures that have been put in place to recover the financial position of the service for this financial year. In effect, Chairman, the report before you looks at the control measures. It doesn't look at the detail of the costs, it doesn't look at any other information. That is something that's inherent within your decision of the 25th of October, where you were asking for that further detailed information to come to your ordinary meeting. So I don't know whether that helps, and I appreciate what's being said in the motion, but I think I have in governance terms to reflect that what the Director has provided for you is what you asked for. And what you have in the rest of that decision was further information on the detail of the costs and activity information. So I don't know whether that helps.
Thank you, Carol. It does. I would suggest that, based on that, Willie, that your motion really should sit not today, but another time and place. But I take your point. Well, that's what we
Chair,
are
here, and as always, sound advice from Carl in terms of governance. Nonetheless, then the report is here, and I would move that we note the report in terms of the control, but that there be further information that I still would hold that there is insufficient financial detail on the level of savings. I would repeat, on the level of savings that could accrue from the recovery plan, which we are looking at just now, against the risk assessment to the service users required to properly scrutinise this recovery activity. So in that respect, we need the two to come together, both this and the financial aspect of the savings.
right. Is that a motion? What is it, Willie? Just
I'm happy to move, Chair, that that the two must come together and that we properly scrutinise the recovery plan against the financial savings that could be accrued, where we have the full detail before us. The two come together to properly scrutinise this.
Just two things. Councillor Wood first, and then we'll come back to you, Willie. Yeah?
Right. It's on that point as well that Councillor Scobie raises, and that is whether, if my earlier suggestion of a seminar could incorporate that, so that we are then in a position for the next official committee meeting to make a proper decision.
Right, okay. First thing, come back to Willie, because the two of them are linked. The 4.3, the report quite clearly says, and it was part of the last committee meeting, that the impact of the control measures and projected revenue outturns will be reported to members of this committee, the next committee, and every recurring committee. So that's where that should come to, Willie, I would suggest. And go with that, and a fuller breakdown with the figures for that committee. Is that doable? Yep. Sean? Andrew? You're okay? You happy with that?
Yeah, I'm happy with that, but with regard to a seminar in between time to get a fuller understanding?
Yeah, I think what we'll need to plan in a number of seminars on different issues, because obviously to learn the workings of a whole department in one seminar is just quite frankly ludicrous. We can have a number of seminars that members be invited to, but I'm no minded at this moment in time to actually be calling extra committee meetings for it. These would be seminars, and it would test the will of the elected members whether they attended or not. I would suggest we'd obviously like everyone to do it, but I can't a three-line whip. But I'd like to, if I could, and make sure everybody came to the seminars. So we can put in place a series of seminars explaining and outlining the work of the department, where you can actually ask some very detailed questions about that particular service area. Are you members happy with that? John?
This was one. It's not to do with that. I'm just wondering, are we still on the recommendations? Are we on the recommendations yet?
I was trying to get there, but yes. Well,
no, just like a few, as I say, propose a few changes, a couple of changes to the recommendations. 2.1, we remove the word support and have it note that the range of measures being taken by the social work services management team. 2.2 is fine. At 2.3, we have note that the further progress reports will be provided to subsequent meetings of this committee, and we agree that a revenue monitoring report comes to every meeting of the Social Services Committee. And if we could add a 2.4, that we agree that if there are any costs associated with external expertise being brought in, that any costs are brought to before this committee.
Yeah, I'm quite comfortable with everything you've said there. I think we do get revenue reports to every committee anyway, don't we? Right. Well, so we can scrutinise the revenue reports at each and every committee. Yeah. Willie?
Yeah, Chair, and it's just on what I put forward and your own response to that. In 2.2, and it's really to ask John just to accept, it says note the contribution, and then in 4.3, it talks to control expenditure. If John would accept, as part of that recommendation, that indeed this recovery plan comes before us with an identified contribution to each of the action plans, so that we can scrutinise, as is referred to here as the contribution, where we do not see the contribution, that we have that under 2.2 in John's recommendations, that we note the activities reported, and that this report comes back with those contributions marked against each activity, so that we can scrutinise them. John would accept that.
Fine. I'm just needing assurance for Sean and John that we can actually incorporate that in time for the next, maybe not for the next committee meeting, it's only a fortnight away, but certainly the one after that. Could we get it in time for the next meeting? So is that an assurance from both of you we can get something back? Yep. Thank you. That'll include the monitoring report then. The only other thing I was wanting to change a wee bit would be actually the measures currently being taken in 2.1 as opposed to the measures being taken, because that could be subject to review when we get the further monitoring reports. We might want to change it to extend that or support. And the reason support was there rather than noting is that we need to give political direction that that we are wanting this budget brought back under control, and simply noting it isn't given that political direction. I mean, I'd like consensus on this one, because we need to send out a united message that this committee expect this budget to be in budget at the time. Yep. Jane?
Actually, you've covered half of the things I was going to say. I agree with you. I think a message should be sent that we are prepared to support the service in efforts to put the thing back on track again. And I think noting is rather mealy-mouthed, so I would certainly agree with you on the level of support. Chairman, can I also just make certain that we have the issue of the locality groups reporting to the respective area committees on the activities which will be area specific.
Yes, I've already said that.
Thank you.
There's due to be each of the area committees in turn have a social work report going.
Yes, exactly.
That's one, so it would just be incorporated in
Tack it
that.
on.
Would that be okay with you?
Tack it on, yeah.
Members agreed with that? Yeah. Rather than doing it as a separate issue. So incorporate in the social work report that's due to come to each of the 4 area committees. Right, we agreed with that? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Mr. Syme.
It was just second Councillor Martin that in 2.1 to note.
Yeah, is that 2.1 in the recommendations? Right. Is there anybody got an amendment?
I've absolutely no difficulty with what was being said, but I think it's important that we give a clear message that we support the department's move towards this. This report is what we asked of the director. He's produced it today. We appreciate we need some finer drilling down in future for future meetings, but I would certainly I would retain the word support.
That's an amendment. Is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Mail. Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, Chair, it's against the note and support, and I don't think it's and have removed it unless we can properly scrutinise the risk assessment to the service users. So it's not just it should go without saying that we would support the department in terms of bringing its budget into line, because we set the budget. That should go without saying. But we haven't got the detail in here about the risk assessment against some of these activities. So I think it's right and proper. At this point, we should be noting until we have the confidence that we can bring it into line on the savings, and that there is that we can see if there is any risk assessment against the service users. So it's not about being mealy-mouthed, it's about recording what is factually correct, and we should note this at this stage, and our support to the department should go without saying.
That's fine. I would just seek some advice either from the Chief Social Work Officer or from the Council Governance Officer on whether we cross the line in terms of us scrutinising individual care packages, which in effect they are. That's what you said.
I never used the words, Chair, and with the greatest respect, what I said was the risk assessment to the service users. I did not say user or indeed individual user, and we've got to do that in terms of the savings. And is there a risk assessment to any service user?
That's the guidance I'm looking for, Willie. In actual fact, is do we breach the confidentiality? Can we do it? Because we're going into the actual nuts and bolts of what's actually happening to a service user, and is that crossing the line between what is our strategic responsibility as a committee and as councillors and an operational matter between the Chief Social Work Officer and the qualified social workers? That's the clarity I'm looking for. Now we can take that forward. Carol, have you any view on that?
Well, the advice I give is twofold. Obviously, it's the role of this committee to act and look at things strategically, but also to receive assurance. And what you have is a professionally run and professionally managed social work service with professionals who will always work within the policies that have been set by the council to assure the interests of the service users. So I think it's kind of like getting the balance between where you drill down and where you receive the evidence and where you have the scrutiny. And I think that is a difficult tension. But I think what you have to do is to say, certainly, it would be for the director, and I think he's always reiterated this, if he felt at any point in time that the resources he had and that his department had were such that there was going to be detriment either to an individual or group of service users, he'd be straight reporting to you. And I think that's almost like it's a fundamental duty of the director to do that. So I probably haven't answered the question directly, but I think I've just had to set the scene. So it's how you have to work on the basis of that there is an integrity, there is a role that the director has to fulfill, which really becomes operational, which there shouldn't be interference on, but it's the process by which you are assured that he is holding that line for you, so that there is no detriment, that he's protecting both individuals and groups of service users, and he's fulfilling the policies that you've set. I don't know whether the Director wants to add to that, but I think it is a matter of that's the fact. And that is how the process of this committee working with the Director has to work.
Yeah, and I think you've also got your individual right as a councillor to act as an advocate, for example, on behalf of a service user, talking directly to officers, I would suggest as well. So that's another avenue open there. We currently have a motion and an amendment. I'd asked earlier if we could insert the words currently between measures in being in 2.1. John, are you quite happy to incorporate that? Yeah, okay, thank you. So, recommendation, we have a motion that, Carol?
Thank you. I have a motion which has been put forward by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Syme, and an amendment put forward by Ian Blake, seconded by Councillor Mayle. I think the substantive changes are in the words 2.1, where in the motion it's to note, in the amendment it's to support. And I just need to confirm on the things where members are in agreement, because I think that it always helps if there's just one word change. I think at 2.1 you were looking for currently to be put in, and that would be both in the motion and the amendment. The other was in 2.2, it's whether you're looking for the amendment as put forward by Councillor Scobie, which is, and I think assurances were given that it could be reported starting at your next committee meeting, which is identifying the contribution that the recovery plan it's identifying the contribution and impacts of the recovery plan and the action plan. I think it's whether or not you're looking for that materially to be in 2.2. At 2.3, then again, it's whether the mover and the seconder of both motion and amendment is, as well as noting, you're actually agreeing, which is something that happens, but I think you're just actually looking to reinforce the fact that there will be revenue monitoring to each meeting of this committee. And just if I can be clear, you were looking at the costs of any external support that were brought in being reported. Now, can I just confirm that's after the fact or before the fact? Is that after or before the fact? After, thank you. I think there was also then within the sense of your decision that you were looking for a series of seminars to be arranged which would allow a comprehensive, in-depth exploration of the entire work of the service, starting with understanding a bit of the finances. Sorry, I'll defer to them.
Councillor Blake?
I've no difficulty with the seminars, but I wouldn't like to think that they would slow down this process.
I confirm that seminars are not decision-making, they're not linkage, there's no cause and effect. This is about informing members. The other elements then were you were actually having within the programme of reports to area committees, you were looking for the locality information, the impact information to be reported, and I think that was then the totality. So it looks as though you've got agreement on the fundamentals of the motion amendment. The only difference then is the first one is to note, the second is to support. So the motion notes, the amendment supports. Members happy, they understand the motion amendment?
Carol, just for clarification, it was as part of the normal area committee reporting process?
Yeah, it was an additional to the existing cycle of area committee social work reports that this particular information then on locality impact vacancies is included. So it's just an extension. I will try and explain to the ACE and the area framework how you've slightly subverted the process, but I think sometimes we have to remember that committees do have powers, and it's your performance reporting framework, and the director was indicating that it wouldn't be a difficulty. So I'm sure that we can cover that appropriately. Okay, we have then the motion, which is, as we've said, to note. The amendment is to support. Chairman.
Amendment.
Vice Chairman. Councillor Blake. Councillor Brodie. Councillor Dempster. Councillor Dick. Amendment, thank you. Councillor Yen. Amendment, thank you. Councillor McKee. Councillor Maitland. Councillor Mayle. Councillor Martin. Councillor Scobie. Councillor Stitt? Councillor Syme? Councillor Wood? We therefore have the amendment carried by 9 votes to 6. You're supporting.
Okay, I have no other competent business put forward. Thanks very much for your attendance and, as always, the way you conducted yourself during the meeting. Thank you.